Welcome to Shaken Not Burned, a cocktail of solutions for a sustainable future. I'm Felicia Jackson.
And I am Giulia Bottaro. Each week we interview experts to talk about parts of the sustainable transition and what you and your business need to know to succeed.
Sustainability is complex and constantly evolving, and it can be hard for a business to adapt and remain competitive.
We are here to help you learn all about the changing economy and the ongoing transition.
So join us as we explore the concepts and the tools you need to plot a course for a sustainable future. Welcome to the latest episode of Shaken Not Burned, where sustainability meets storytelling and real-world solutions. This isn't just talk, it's a deep dive into the forces shaping our planet and the bold ideas driving real change.
And
today we're thrilled to have as our guest Phil Korbel, co-founder and director of advocacy at the Carbon Literacy Project. With his roots in BBC broadcasting and decades of work in environmental advocacy, Phil brings a unique lens to climate education. Over the past decade, the Climate Literacy Project has empowered tens of thousands of learners through a day-long peer-to-peer training framework. What's the idea? To equip individuals, organisations and communities with the knowledge, tools and motivation to understand their carbon footprint and act on it. With champions in local government, global brands and even transport networks, the initiative is reshaping how we think about climate engagement and low-carbon culture. He's joining us today to talk about the transformative power of carbon literacy, an approach that equips people from all walks of life with the understanding and tools they need to take meaningful action. So we're going to explore what carbon literacy is and why it's a game changer in making climate knowledge truly actionable. We're going to talk about why effective climate communication has got to be local, practical, and emotionally engaging. And more than anything else, we're going to hear some real stories of change, from city councils to classrooms, that actually show what happens when people are empowered to act. So, Phil, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
So let's kick off with what exactly do you mean by carbon literacy and why does it matter so much now?
I'll start backwards. Why does it matter? Because there's no walk of life that is unaffected by extreme weather. If anyone asks themselves, can I do the things I really want to do in my life? Work, play, family. How well can I do that if we've got an unstable climate, extreme weather? More than that, everyone, and I mean everyone, has a role to play. And we've got to bridge that gap between this affects everyone and everyone's got something that they can chip in by mass culture shift, basically. I mean, I think it's fairly well accepted that we don't go around, randomly killing people or even, more seriously, spaffing money that we don't have. I mean, we've got some basic rules. Cultural norms. That's the thing, Felicia. Yeah. And actually, we've got to embed climate in that. So equipping people with the wherewithal to do their best thing at every level, everywhere, I think is pretty essential to minimizing the damage that we're doing to the climate at the moment.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense, and especially in terms of the conversations that I'm often having. People do find a lot of the aspects of action on climate change quite hard to fathom and feel quite disempowered. So could you briefly introduce the Carbon Literacy Project and what it is that you actually do?
We're a Manchester-based charity with about 90 people on the payroll, and we do one thing, which is to enable people to use our adaptable framework for carbon literacy training anywhere. And we do that by engaging our very substantial community of practice with other interested parties. How's this working? What does it do for people like me? We would get that story being told to people that are interested. We would work with people to either identify or author their own courses, which we then certify as carbon literacy courses, which typically the interested party, whether that's an employer, educator or community, they would deliver to their own people. At the end of every day's worth of learning, every learner has to devise their best actions. And this is one of our unique things. You've got to, having learnt what you've learnt during the day, then create the best thing that you can do, whoever you are, wherever you are. That gets written down, gets sent back to us, and then we issue certificates to those learners to see if they are carbon literate or not. So we do quality control and deliver this lovely, portable, increasingly valuable certificate of learning to people, also to organizations. So it's a full journey that we support by doing everything but training.
Okay, so what you're basically doing is enabling everyone with the capacity to train with the tools they need to do that training.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So can you explain to me, because carbon literacy as a term I don't think is that well known in the general public. How does it go beyond general climate awareness?
Typical climate awareness is another nature documentary about skinny polar bears and melting ice and stuff, which again, I mean, I'm the biggest ever fan of David Attenborough and his colleagues. Makes for great telly, even a bit tear-jerking. When we have to fit it into our hierarchy of needs, where does that come? Because it feels far away. Someone back in the day came up with this meme. We don't act on climate because it's not me, it's not us, it's not here, it's not now. It's all of the above. And I think getting that across is a vital first part of it. But going back to the definition you used at the beginning of the program, so you've got awareness, yeah, ability. What the heck can I do? Me, just me, what can I do that's achievable? And why the hell does it matter? That's just so important. So relevance all the way through. So much so that I ban polar bears from carbon literacy training. I've had to make an exception because we're actually working with an organization that works in Svalbard. But you get where I'm coming from. You know, iconic megafauna. Yeah, great. But it's not putting food on the table. It's not optimizing my overheads as a company leader, et cetera, et cetera. So bringing it close to people, which you can, it's not felt to be distant now anymore in any sense, bringing that home and then equipping people with tools and giving them permission to use those tools. That's why we need those three things in play for engagement, impactful engagement. We use the term, and it was much contested when we were dreaming it up, of carbon literacy to denote a core competence. Who would want to be illiterate? So this idea, again, that this has to be an endemic value and competence. Now I think that people get it more. Also, perhaps that in some circles it's a bit more contested. I don't know if we'd call it that again, but it's a good name for what we do. And indeed, trainers don't have to call their courses carbon literacy.
Right.
The certificate will always say carbon literacy at the top because it's us.
So I think the question that then begs, because we're talking about engagement, awareness and action, what sorts of behaviours and decisions does it help to influence?
All sorts, because of the proportionality that we look at. We work with a very large and controversial civil engineering project, and with tons and tons and tons of embedded carbon. The first cohort to go through their training, were the C-suite. Now, C-suite have to really pull their finger out. They've got huge carbon levers. So they actually went and pulled forward their net zero target date as a result of their training. Now, that's what we want leadership to do.
That's almost the opposite of what's actually happening in the world today, because a lot of big corporates are pulling back on their net zero targets.
Yeah, and that's not going to affect their business at all. But at the other end of the scale, we've got a large Next clothing store in the city centre here, and one of the early learners was a security guard, who sadly I've lost his name, so I've rechristened him Bert. And Bert told us that the clothes come into the store in the loading bay in long plastic tubes. He said it's like long, big Swiss rolls, he said. And he immediately spotted that they throw away the plastic it comes in. That goes to landfill, and he got that was wrong. Now, his action was to keep those plastic tubes, cut them up into bin bags, and made his own bin bags. Grams of carbon, but what a talking point. Bert going around the store at closing time with his colleagues. Have you seen my bin bags? I made them because I'm carbon literate, I am. Now, in terms of culture shift, that's amazing. So absolutely, horses for courses, and just bringing your best thing. We tend to think it's workplace. Exceptionally, if someone who didn't have any carbon levers at work had a bad city break shopping habit, cutting down on that, flying to New York for a bit of shopping, that's going to make a bigger difference. But if they're carbon literate, you get that. It's all about what's the biggest ticket you can use. And if you're having to spend at one end in your carbon budget, where do you save? So it's all of that. That's this core concept around carbon literacy of knowing the impact of your day-to-day actions.
Well, I love that, because one of the things that is part of the ongoing corporate conversation and the policy-making conversation is awareness of the trade-offs you have to make, because you're juggling so many different priorities, and actually ensuring that you're making people aware of that on a micro basis means the potential for scaling up hundreds of thousands of small actions.
Yep. And doing your best thing wherever they are. Applying your nous to this. One of my favorite actions, we highlight the best actions that come through, was from a heating engineer, I think either for a housing provider or a local council. And his action was mind-boggling, because he was talking about the width of the insulation lagging he put on the pipes for his district heating system. And he'd actually done the maths to say, well, if I increase this lagging by 3 millimeters, I'm going to save this much carbon. Now, a heating engineer specialist is going to be able to do that stuff. There's the master shipwright of the heritage warship HMS Victory, down on the south coast. He patches up this ship with teak, the very scarce, beautiful rainforest hardwood. And his action was about the reuse of the scrap that he didn't use to patch up this beautiful ship. And it actually, they've used it to take it into schools to talk about rainforest conservation.
That's
so
wonderful.
It's just, the penny drops, what am I going to do? And that, again, is going back to the difference between climate awareness and carbon literacy. Climate awareness on its own is necessary, but if it is not balanced by agency, giving you the wherewithal to act on this, frankly, petrifying, and if you're not petrified, you're not paying attention thing, then we're letting the whole side down. There's even an argument to say it's better off not knowing, I should say.
I believe the phrase is ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. And for us folk in the climate field, isn't it a curse? So many people can be swanning around with this amazing sunshine we've been having in recent months and saying, look at this lovely sunshine. And the rest of us are going, oh, the climate's out of whack. Help. It's a bit of a curse.
But what I love about this is because one of the things we talk about a lot in Some Shaken Not Burned is sustainability literacy, which is why the Carbon Literacy Project sort of leapt out to me. Because what it sounds like you're doing is empowering people to make decisions for themselves in ways that are appropriate for them. We deal a lot with corporations, but I think one of the most challenging things is that sense of disempowerment and loss that people feel when they start really engaging with the concept of climate change, and that fear that there's nothing they can do and you might as well just go to the pub and forget about it.
Yep, totally. When we started this in Manchester 12, 13 years ago, we had some great plenaries going on as the city devised its first action plan. And it was very, very clear that there's no shortage of the best ideas to get this right. But we were starting this enterprise looking at supply side only. Where's the demand? Where's the understanding for this? Who's going to act on this? Who's going to buy this? Who's going to vote for this? That's why we really had to push on this notion of a large-scale cultural shift to bring this home. And now, as the populist right seem to be doing, to equate climate action with, and I hate this phrase, woke ideology, is even more disempowering. This idea that it's something to do with an authoritarian elite, when actually all we are doing in promoting climate action is preserving a safe future for our children, and that's somehow woke.
I mean, I think the word woke is really difficult because it doesn't really mean anything. I think the way that climate change and climate action has become football in ideological wars is incredibly damaging. I think it's also worth noting, because we are based in the UK, we've currently got a lot of pushback on net zero targets and arguments about how green action is expensive. And it's like, look at the latest report from the London Stock Exchange. The green economy is the largest growing part of the economy.
So says the CBI.
No, I think you and I are on the same page here. It doesn't make any sense. What you want, there's a wonderful cartoon that came out quite a long time ago, but it was along the lines of, a fat cat in the audience complaining. But what if we make the air cleaner and the water cleaner and we have a livable atmosphere? What if we spend all this money and that's all we get? And you think, well, that's quite a lot, actually.
There's one of my favorite climate science communicators is Professor Kevin Anderson of the Manchester Tyndall Centre. And I borrowed this thing from him about the common roots, I think from Greek, of economy and ecology. And I think eco is home. It's where everything comes from. It's your foundation.
Oh, that's lovely.
And the very notion that a degraded ecology can somehow magically support any form of economy, come on.
It's madness.
So I think we of the climate concerned have to focus on bringing this home to people's existing values and concerns. Now that the food retail industry, that the agricultural sector are waking up to the very serious threats to food supply from extreme weather. Back in the day, there was a drought so long ago when Ukraine was at peace, there was a drought hitting the Ukrainian wheat belt. That led to the end of Weetabix mini shreddies on it was really tangible. Prices went up for bread and breakfast cereals, and this brand even disappeared because there wasn't the wheat. We're just going to see this time and time again, these tangible impacts. Down the road from me in South Manchester, there's a junior football team, Didsbury Vikings. And I heard that last season, because of the torrential rain that we were having, they lost 40% of their practice sessions for waterlogged pitches. Now, okay, we'll get by on, that.
It still affects your quality of life.
And it brings the message home. So I think we've got to be very adept at bringing this home to where people are. Thus my antipathy to polar bear messaging.
That makes total sense, because I think the whole point is, if you're going to be successful in communicating anything, you have to go to where people are, whether that's where they are in their lives or where they are in their beliefs or where they are online. But I think one of the things that this then raises is, who do you think benefits most from being carbon literate? Where can you have the biggest impact? Is it individuals or organisations or maybe communities?
Can I cheat and say everything?
Yes, of course you can, because that's usually the answer.
So, no, at an individual level, one of the worst things about climate change at the moment, before we in the UK feel the worst aspects of it, is that appalling feeling of disempowerment. Here's this big, scary thing that I can do bugger all to stop. I started this because I helped start this, I should say. I got into climate from my previous work through becoming a dad. And thinking that my daughters at some point will turn to me and go, Dad, what did you do to stop this? And I wanted to be able to put my hand on my heart and say this, actually. I've tried my best with this, but this will run through certainly through parents' minds, doing your best by your kids. So, and more broadly, parent or not, you want to feel that you're playing your part in preventing harm. So, it's that basis of self-validation and well-being, I think, which is being progressively eroded in other sectors as well, in other parts of life. So to know that you are equipped and permitted to do your best thing, that's a massive win. At a more utilitarian level, carbon literacy helps people get better jobs. It's a great thing on the CV. And for recruiters, our first FTSE 100 is Auto Trader, the car sales website. They know that a whole bunch of the bright people they demand to have working for them want purposeful employment. And thus, and this is absolutely not tokenistic with Auto Trader, they're a platinum carbon literacy organization now. A side benefit of that is being able to attract and retain the best talent. So that shows the bridge from the individual to the organizational. But okay, you're in a public sector or supermarket supply chain, and your client says, right, we need your scope 3 data and we need to see it coming down by 5-10% annually, and you're going to provide the data on that too. You can't leave that to your environmental management intern, as many still do. This is a huge task, and you need your people on board, not just for the data, but for the implementation and bringing their best to it. So at an organizational level, it's very much about maximizing your capacity to deliver on what necessarily will be challenging targets coming from you left, right, and centre.
Okay. So I can definitely see how carbon literacy would actually help across an organisation because of the different pressures that we're facing. Carbon is one of the few areas that's well quantified and well understood, and companies are having to deal with far wider issues around nature and water and all sorts of different things. So it makes sense that the more knowledge and understanding that your employees have, the easier it's going to be to get what you have to do today done. But so what does a typical carbon literacy training look like?
So it's a day's worth. I'm trying to sum up typical. We've got
Typical's a difficult word because it's every sector, every place.
870 courses now, Alicia.
Okay, so that's going to be difficult to describe. Let me rephrase it. Could you explain to me what carbon literacy training looks like?
Yes. So we have our central text is the carbon literacy standard against which all carbon literacy courses are designed. And it's a day's worth. Let's start with a day's worth. The BBC, early adopters at Media City and Salford, they would lock people in a room for a whole day, which is actually very impactful because of the emotional journey. You go through the emotional roller coaster of climate awareness and then the buzz from agency all in a day with your colleagues. That's great. On the research vessel, the Sir David Attenborough, the British Antarctic Survey, our southernmost training venue, they train for an hour a day after dinner in the ship's lounge because that's the only time when everyone gets together. A day's worth of learning and doing. The NHS, there's anyone with an NHS email can access a half day of e-learning on the basics, and then you step up to a live half-day workshop with your trust or your discipline to complete, for example. I would say if typically, actually, it's 2 half days, probably the average. You trot through the science. Yep, greenhouse gases, they are these, they insulate, they stick around, they come from these sorts of places. Then the really scary stuff. Why this 1.5 thing, what happens there? What happens at 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 6 degrees? That's the horrible bottom end of this roller coaster. And obviously backed up by the science, this idea that the IPCC is a distilled version of peer-to-peer science. So
it's also, I know I shouldn't interrupt, but one that I think most people don't understand about the IPCC is it has to be approved by every country that is a party to the climate treaty, which means almost by definition, it is the most acceptable to politicians. It's going to be the least. I mean,
they sound the corners off. If the IPCC, especially the agreed texts coming forward to the Conference of Parties, is saying, yeah, we're a bit worried about this, you really need to get worried about it. So getting that message across in layman's terms is there within the training. You have a bit about the regulatory framework, this COP thing, right the way down to what company policy is or your local climate emergency plan, etc. Everything that affects you there. What's a carbon footprint? What's a carbon budget? Typically, we'll ask people to look at their home budget as a way of their home footprint, as a way of getting their heads around the whole concept. Who's doing what that in your sector? What's the best practice? How do you talk about it? Communication is a separate learning outcome here. Really important. We ask that this is delivered by peers, people like you. I mentioned the relevance thing a few times, but also that it's active collaboration. We're yet to be convinced that the carbon literacy can be delivered wholly through e-learning, because we insist on active collaboration between learners. It's really important that you're able to talk to your peers about this. And then action, that devising of action at the end. So that's the typical stuff. The content, I always talk to course designers saying, right, we've got a framework with loads of gaps in it. You have to fill the gaps with your stuff. And your stuff is so broad. So my work is to explain this to all and sundry. And the fact that we have carbon literacy courses for wedding planners, for funeral directors, for master shipwrights, for polar explorers, chief execs, and casual staff, it says so much. You know, this extraordinary community coming on board.
It is an incredibly powerful thing, because I think if you listen to the mainstream discourse, you listen to the media, there is this sense that it's all some great thing being imposed from above. And then over in a corner, there's wild climate activists doing crazy things.
They're not just going, it matters, they're doing something.
Yeah.
And the
acting.
the neuroscientists, the psychiatrists will all talk about the values heuristic, where values are strengthened or even initiated through action. So they go hand in glove, and we often talk about the value action gap.
Mm.
What was that thing about the oat milk latte conundrum? Oh, I'm totally on board with climate as you climb into your flight to the Bahamas for the third time in the year.
I think it's the almond milk one, because almond uses so much water. Almonds are just, delicious but dreadful, and you can't eat them. Sorry, I won't say you can't eat them.
Added to the list.
Well, trade-offs again. How much do you really love your almond, and what are you prepared to give up to let yourself have one?
You've got it. Yeah.
So I think one of the things I'd love to know is, and you must know this from having spoken to so many people across so many different sectors, what are some common misunderstandings about carbon literacy?
Carbon. Actually, we use carbon as shorthand for greenhouse gases. That's all. And that dropping plastic straws is somehow significant to climate. Actually, that illustrates the fact that obviously there's a whole microplastics crisis, but it's not a climate crisis. Actually, there's not a huge amount out there in terms of misapprehensions. And funnily enough, we're not getting a huge amount of pushback.
Now, that's one of the things I did want to know about. Because how do you actually deal with resistance by people or skepticism? And I think for me, this is...
Every trainer is equipped with...
Do you think the world has changed? Because I remember when I started working in this area, and it really was, are you wearing hemp shoes? Are you a hippie?
No.
And I do think there's much more appetite for change, and people do want to get involved, but there must still be some pushback. And is there? And if so, what does it look like?
Going back to misapprehensions, somehow that this is all very worthy and hair shirt, said hemp sandals, knitting lentils, etc. No. So, that is somehow about less, when actually it's about more. It's about how we define or redefine prosperity to include well-being, feeling that you're part of what's going on around us, that you're contributing to the well-being of your neighborhood, your town, country. Certainly your children. So making sure that actually that buying throwaway fashion, you can actually do a little bit of a quick trade-off for something that you really, really like and will last and won't disintegrate after 3 washes. There's a lovely thing about cost in use. There's a landlord here in Manchester that's built highly energy efficient flats in town. And the rental is higher than the average rental. How do they sell and sell so well? Because the cost in use is about 1/3 less when you add bills into rent. So getting your head around how you thrive through climate action, I think, is really, really important.
So that demonstrates really clearly that carbon literacy can help you change the way in which you think about your operations. And if you shift, I suppose if you're thinking about the whole life of use, so the build and the use, it's very different. Are there any other sectoral stories you can tell me about where we can see examples of that?
One of our largest take-ups in the public sector is with the Environment Agency. And when it was clear that they were going to go at scale and train their entire staff, I sort of gently put it to them all, hang on, you're in the Environment Agency. Don't you know this stuff? And they said, well, half of us do. Half of us have, no, it's not in the job description. There's building the dams and, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So it's used there as a baseline. So is everyone on board and know why we're doing this?
And I suppose is everyone coming from the same place, the same set of understandings?
Yep. With the British Antarctic Survey, who literally do contribute to the IPCC. I said, you're the ultimate people that don't know this. And we're good on the science, but we're building a new base in Rothera in the Antarctic. We really need this to get everyone on board with minimizing its footprint. So, there's stuff there about everyone on board applying what they know already to the climate crisis.
And I suppose There is an argument that if you get everyone within a community, whether that community is a work community or otherwise, it's a lot easier to have conversations about how you cut water use or how you increase insulation. So that becomes a very powerful lever for change. And that brings me to a very important question, which is for those of our listeners who are not associated with someone who is already working on this, how can they become carbon literate themselves?
Tends to be organizationally based.
Okay.
The majority of carbon literacy courses are within organizations of all sorts. We do have open training. On carbonliteracy.com, we've got a tag that says events. Under there, that gives you a list of open training of various sorts there. But really, talk to us, get in touch via the website, and we will introduce you to people like you who are doing this. With this community of practice around the thousands of organizations, I think across 45 nations now, it's very hard to keep up. We will introduce you to people like you who are doing it, and you can jump onto a course where anyone's available. But part of the joy of this is that you do this. So we don't set a high bar for becoming a trainer. The quality control comes in through checking the evidence. So you just need to qualify as carbon literate yourself, basically, to deliver the training.
So if, for example, I wanted to train to become carbon literate, I could turn around and train our listeners?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You'd have to define that as a cohort, Felicia. I mean, that'd be interesting.
In that case, I'll ask people to get in touch and tell me if they want to join a cohort.
Yeah. But I mean, I was talking to some ethical financial advisors yesterday who are actually pioneers. Name check them. They're called Castlefield in Manchester, and they were first in sector to train their own people. But we were saying, well, hang on, wouldn't this be useful for your clients who are probably on board with climate, but actually would like a bit more about the how-to end of it? So I'm yet to be presented with a cohort to whom this would not be beneficial. And I know I would say that. I know that's my job to say that. But seriously, because there's no aspect of life that is unaffected by global heating, there is something for everyone to get on board with. And here's an interesting one, because we're expanding our work in the global south. And indeed, we have a strong strand around climate justice needs to be seen within the training. When we're talking to folk with a small footprint, the last thing we do is wag our finger and say, you've got to reduce your footprint. That would be patronizing at best. But there are so many co-benefits from climate action around employability, around health and well-being at a local level, around economy, etc. Sometimes the carbon literacy doesn't have to be about your foot. It can be about how you can influence others, etc. Reducing meat in your diet and dairy in your diet. Please note, I am saying reducing, not scrapping.
Absolutely.
Will lower your footprint, but it's going to extend your life expectancy. Can we not have a bit of that? Leaving the car behind and maybe walking a little way down to the train station or bus stop if you can, or cycling. Hello. One of my favourite testimonials from an early council learner was about their weight loss because they were doing just that. They'd lost some weight because they were walking to the bus stop. So these co-benefits are so multiple, so rich. And feeling you've got a stake in this is just so important.
So, I mean, I suppose it's a wish to have a carbon literate society, but what would that look like to you?
Almost like making not spaffing your footprint as being second nature. It's like, I'd love climate action to be just so everyday as to almost be boring. Just, no, of course I'm not going to,
I've just remembered what it was like when I was a child. I remember when the seatbelt rules came in, and it's just the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard in my life. And now I get into the back seat of a car, and if I don't put my seatbelt on, the children are freaking out. For their generation, it would no more cross their minds not to wear a seatbelt than to fly.
Smoking.
Yeah,
classic.
Exactly the same.
Again, I'm of an age. I love going out to gigs and stuff, and I can still so remember coming home for a night out, and you stank.
Yeah,
the clothes straight in. Oh my gosh! Telling that to my daughters now, they're going, "You did what?" And that's where we need to be. It is so common sense. It hits so many spots, which is why my irritation with the political grifters who would seek to capitalize on general dissatisfaction with the way things are by slowing down climate action. It's just like, no, let's have arguments about any number of things, but the idea that climate action, science-driven, science-impelled climate action is somehow ideological or optional for the sake of a highly notional voter margin. No.
I remember writing years ago that as an individual, you only really have 3 ways in which you can act. One is with your purse, one is with your investments, and that includes your pension and all sorts of things like that. And the other is with your vote. And I suppose for many politicians, there's a fear that a carbon literate populace would not support them.
Or rather, actually, until March, we had a political consensus on this. Let's have that back. I will happily argue about climate policy, the best ways of which there are many, and discussing. But
they all have different trade-offs.
Yes. There's another thing that to add to your list there. So your purse, your investments, and your vote. Actually, your actions as well. So starting with that, I suppose
that's what the Carbon Literacy Project is about. Those are the 3 things that have always been seen as the levers of change. But actually what you're saying is what the Carbon Literacy Project does is enable people to add actions to that so that in every day and in every way they can start acting in a responsible fashion for their own communities and themselves.
I want to find out how much extra value the Carbon Literate put on purchasing decisions, comparing, you've got like for like goods or services, one is low carbon, one isn't. How much more will you put on that?
To be fair, I think that's a bit of a challenge because historically there's been the green premium. Companies have expected to charge more for something that is climate friendly. Yep. What's been interesting is some conversations I've been having with asset managers around the fact that the green premium is disappearing in the stock markets because it's kind of expected now.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes. With cars, we know the magic point is actually going to be like for like when we have parity.
Yeah.
And again, the cost in use thing comes back again.
Yeah.
I'm actually at that stage. My venerable battered old Toyota will finally have to get traded in. And I know I'm going to have to pay a bit more compared to a polluting fossil fueled car. But I know actually I can justify the extra spend because the cost in use is going to be through the floor. So, and I think that parallel comes through more and more. So, but we know we're influencing change.
That's wonderful. My final question is always, is there anything I haven't asked you about that I should have done? Something you'd like to tell us, or perhaps even just thoughts that you'd like the listeners to leave with?
We see this as necessary endemic professional development if we look at it through the workplace lens. And the vast majority of professional development, particularly mandatory professional development, what more data protection, et cetera, et cetera. When we go into any substantial size of employer, you can imagine that HR, L&D are all over us with feedback surveys and the like. And this is popular, massively popular, because you've got the learner going, okay, this thing, I really don't want to think about this thing because I don't know what to do about it. It's really scary. And then work pops up and goes, this climate thing, we're going to equip you with a bunch of stuff to harness your best energies and skills. And we're going to equip you and enable you, permit you, ask you to go and do some good stuff about this thing you were worrying about. That's a win. And it comes back time and time again in feedback. So it's not just necessary, it's popular too. And great things flow from it.
Well, that's certainly a wonderful note on which to end our conversation. I would also urge any organisation that's interested in working with this to get in touch with Phil, because we'll add all the details to the show notes. So, Phil, all I've got to say is thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I've really enjoyed learning about the Carbon Literacy Project and really excited about the work that you're doing. To our listeners, I hope you've found it useful, interesting, and I certainly hope that carbon literacy is going to become a much more mainstream conversation.